first time we've sat down kind of knee to knee.
True.
If life was a lesson, what did you learn?
Life is a vapor. It's here today and it's going quickly. I thank God for this moment.
This is TBN. Get the app and watch us on Apple TV.
Supreme Court, the day the justices shut down Roe v. Wade. Protesters at a distance while the court is surrounded by police and security fencing. For the millions of people who have been fighting for the pro-life movement across the 50 years since Roe v. Wade, today was their day to celebrate. Good evening, everyone. I'm Doug McKelway, and this is a special 2-hour edition of Centerpoint. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to overturn Roe v. Wade. It was the most anticipated decision in decades and arguably the most important given the number of lives at stake. That said, it does not eliminate abortion, at least at the national level, but it does allow individual states to ban abortion or to still permit abortion. We have some very special guests for the next 2 hours, including an exclusive interview with Becky Curry. She is the woman who wrote the Mississippi law that this case was decided upon. Stephen Aden, the pro-life lawyer who wrote much of the brief that the justices read to make their decisions. Pastor Jack Graham, who started a pregnancy center that has saved 80,000 lives since Roe. Janet Marana, who runs the organization that counsels women who've had abortions and are living with regret. Alveda King, a leading pro-life advocate and the niece of MLK Jr. And TBN's Erick Stakelbeck, who is live outside the court among the protesters. TBN's Melinda Lane with some young women who've chosen not to abort. And we begin with the decision itself and two of the most influential pro-life leaders in the country, Sue Liebel of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, and Father Frank Pavone, who spent his entire working life fighting for this day. Father Frank, good to see you.
Hi, Doug. It's so good to be with you on this historic day.
You must be ecstatic.
I am. That's a good word for it. You know, I was right at the edge of my seat this morning, as I've been on every one of the recent Supreme Court decision days. And actually, I'm here with pro-life leaders and activists from across the country at the National Right to Life Convention, a pre-scheduled event. So what a providential place to be. And we were in watching the court's decisions this morning. And when the Dobbs came out, cheers were erupting in the hallways here and among all the people that, like you just referenced, we have been working for decades for this day. I marched in the third annual March for Life in 1976, over 3 years after Roe was issued. And we always knew, we were always confident, I can say this of all these pro-life leaders, we were confident that this day would come. Because, for reasons we can discuss, but the Constitution does not and never has, nor has any of our history in America indicated that this Constitution provides a right to kill babies in the womb. It's simply not there. And Justice Alito and the others who voted with him are crystal clear about that in today's decision.
Well, you make a really important point right there, because the mantra stemming from the leadership of the Democratic Party since this morning's decision has been that this was a revocation of constitutional rights. We heard it from the President of the United States. We heard it from Speaker Pelosi. We've heard it from former President Barack Obama and many, many, many others. Why are they saying that? And what are their legal grounds for saying that?
Well, the court has reversed itself numerous times. You know, one of the things that the other side is saying when you ask them, where is the right to abortion? Why are you saying it's a constitutional right? They'll point to the 14th Amendment and they'll say liberty. It says liberty. But they're making several logical jumps from liberty to killing a baby in the womb. It's just not there. The court has judged, for example, there was a series of cases, it's called the Lochner era of the court, where using the same 14th Amendment reasoning, there was this right to contract that some employers were saying, well, you know, my employee can work beyond the limits that the state law sets for working hours, for example, or I can pay my employees less than what the state sets as the minimum wage. And, you know, the court went through an era where it was recognizing this right that wasn't nowhere in the Constitution, but then eventually they reversed themselves on that. And they said, you know, we have to be careful what we put under the umbrella of liberty, because then people can claim the right to do whatever they want. No, we have to be a little more circumspect. We have to look at what the people of the nation have always understood liberty to mean, not what the preferences of particular justices are, or even of movements within our country. And the justices today made a very wise decision. They made a very humble decision. Because, Doug, what they said was, listen, it doesn't make sense for us 9 unelected justices to decide abortion policy for 330 million Americans. Let the 330 Americans decide rather than the nine Supreme Court justices. Let them work with their lawmakers. The people of California will come to a different conclusion than the people of Alabama. You know, New York will be different from Louisiana. And this is the way our system is supposed to work. That's why we're the United States, because we can have very different positions and still remain one union. I don't know what the Democrats are thinking, but, you know, it looks like what they want to do is they want the citizens to just sit back and let the Supreme Court hand them constitutional rights on a silver platter without, Doug, without either the citizens or, frankly, these Democrat leaders making a persuasive case that somehow chopping the head off of a living baby in the womb is something good to do. Now, they can still make that case. And what the justices today are saying to them is, go ahead, make your case to your elected lawmakers. If you can persuade them, you can still allow abortion. But if you can't persuade them, don't expect us to give you cover, you know, us unelected justices.
So in many respects, your work now has gotten, if anything, despite savoring the victory which you've achieved today, your work has now suddenly just gotten harder. One could argue it's gotten 50 times as hard as it was previously.
You know, from one perspective, now we have these 50 state battles, and, you know, the battles are not, you know, tomorrow or the next day. They're already underway. But in another sense, it's easier, and let me explain what I mean. The work has been going on in the states over all these decades. The courts have been not letting it take effect in many instances. States will vote to protect the unborn. The courts block the law, but the work has been done. What happens now, and what's going to happen over these coming days and weeks, is that work that has been done for decades, crafting very reasonable limits and even restrictions on abortion, is now going to be able to take effect. We're not going to have to deal with, oh, we did all this work on these laws because we've taken note of science. We know more about the unborn. We know more about the harm abortion does. We know more about how it harms other areas of the law. That's one of the arguments made in today's decision. It distorts the legal process. But we take this knowledge and we put it into public policy, and then the court blocks it, and the court doesn't want to know about the evidence that has been obtained. Now our work becomes easier in the sense that working off of this evidence of who the unborn child is and how harmful abortion is, we can now craft laws, put them into effect, and not worry that the court is going to put a roadblock to these reasonable laws by saying, oh, no, you can't do that because abortion's a constitutional right. What the court has done today, and those who are trained in the law will understand what I'm about to say, that it has changed, it has lowered the standard of review to the rational basis test. In other words, what the court is saying in layman's terms is, if a state passes a law and it's reasonable, okay, and they have a legitimate reason, i.e., let's protect babies in the womb and let's protect the health of women, well, then they can do it. They don't have to go through extra hoops to prove that it's constitutional.
Mm-hmm. You know, Father Frank, you've spent many years at the March for Life in its cold January days. in Washington, D.C. I did too, but as a reporter for both local affiliates in Washington and then at Fox News. In fact, I still have a big indentation on my shin from a nasty fall I took on the ice at one of those marches.
Oh.
But no, that's not my point. My point is there must have been times over these decades, literally decades, where you felt this was a hopeless cause, or at least not a hopeless cause, maybe a dark period in the prospect of ending abortion, right?
Well, you know why there were moments when we said, oh boy, it's going to take a long time to reverse Roe v. Wade. It's very simple to delineate those moments. That was when Democrats were in power. Because although it doesn't have to be this way, Doug, it has proven to be this way, that the Democrat Party has become the party of abortion. The Republican Party has become the party of protecting the lives of the unborn. When we have had Democrat presidents, we knew they would be not only blocking pro-life legislation, but that they would be appointing pro-life judges and justices. When we had Republicans in office, I mean, the author of today's decision was appointed by George W. Bush in his second term. We worked like crazy to reelect George W. Bush for a second term. And today we're reaping the fruits of all that work. We knew it would be a long process. The reason it's taken almost 50 years to reverse Roe v. Wade is divided government. When you've got, the only time we've made progress with substantial federal pro-life legislation is when the Republicans have had both the White House, the House, and the Senate. And then, we have to say we wouldn't be at this point today without President Donald Trump, because all the voters that voted for him, I know many of them are listening now, and they voted, there was a large majority of voters who voted with the Supreme Court in mind. They said, we know that this choice of president is going to shape the court. We want to shape the court in a constitutional direction. And that's what these justices did today. They said the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. That's all they said. Let it be worked out by the people and their elected representatives. And that was exactly the promise President Trump made and exactly the reason so many voters elected him.
Father Frank, one other thing about the March for Life that I noticed throughout all those years, when it was over and done, they were always extremely peaceful. And in fact, when they were over, I always saw people cleaning up their trash. The mall was as spotlessly clean after the March for Life as it was before. That's the first time I've ever seen that, and I saw it every year at the March for Life. Can you stand by? We're going to talk to you later in the next 2 hours, if you'd be so kind to stand by.
I sure will. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Father Frank. Joining us now, next to the Supreme Court, is our Centerpoint correspondent, Erick Stakelbeck. Erick, set the scene for us outside the building right now.
Well, Doug, you mentioned the March for Life with Father Frank. Earlier, we had a pretty strong pro-life contingent here at the Supreme Court, including many young people. That's pretty much cleared out now. What we do have are thousands of mostly pro-abortion demonstrators outside of the court. It's a very raucous crowd, Doug, but only a few thousand. Some very colorful language being thrown around. One speaker just called America a fascist country. They are none too happy, obviously, about the decision today. The big question, Doug, is what happens when the sun goes down tonight? Being here in D.C. in 2020, obviously riots then where we had protesters converge on the White House. We won't see that tonight. President Biden, obviously a very pro-Roe president, but who knows what will happen outside of the court. The other issue is some of the rhetoric coming from Democrat leaders here. President Biden, to his credit, earlier today called for peaceful protests and no violence, but by the same token, he also said this is not over, and he wants Congress to enshrine Roe v. Wade as law. We also had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, the very popular young New York congresswoman, here outside of the court today, leading chants of let's go to the streets, take it to the streets. We will not accept this decision. Lastly, Maxine Waters of California, a veteran Democrat congresswoman, said, and I quote, "To hell with the Supreme Court. We won't accept this decision." So again, Doug, it's Friday. Darkness will fall in a few hours. We've got a long weekend, so it's been peaceful so far. Let's hope it stays that way.
Right. Erick, I notice you're reporting right now from what is reporters call the swamp site on the Capitol Hill grounds, the east side of the Capitol. So they've pushed reporters back several hundred yards from the front of the Supreme Court there, where they used to let reporters do their stand-ups there. That area in front of the court is now marked off with fencing, correct? And are you seeing a greater police presence?
Definitely a strong police presence, Doug. And just to set the scene for folks at home, we are in between the U.S. Senate, the Senate side of the Capitol, and the Supreme Court. Doug, as you said, this area is called the Swamp. There's a lot of reporters here. A very strong police presence. I would argue, Doug, not as strong as the inauguration last year when President Biden was inaugurated. I was here also covering that event for TBN. Heavy fencing, but we do have the Supreme Court obviously blocked off. It is not accessible to the protesters, thankfully, and a strong police presence here. But again, how long will these protesters stay? A few thousand left right now, Doug, a very raucous crowd. You may be able to hear them over my shoulder
loud and clear
in the near distance, but will they stay once the sun goes down? That's a big question, Doug. And again, hopefully it all stays peaceful, not only in D.C., but look, around the country, Doug. New York, L.A., Philadelphia, major cities. We have this radical pro-abortion group called Jane's Revenge, calling for a night of revenge tonight to protest this decision. This is a group, Doug, that has vandalized churches and crisis pregnancy centers. So there is a real concern about violence this weekend.
That's right. I think there's been as many as 40 documented cases, last I checked, of violence or vandalism at some of these pregnancy crisis centers and involving people aligned with those centers. So we'll keep an eye on that. Please, if something erupts out there, let our control room know, and we'll come right back to you, Eric.
We're here, Doug.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
So now, the fight goes to the states. Joining us now is the State Policy Director for Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, Sue Liebel. Sue, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How is this fight going for the states? Your organization is very instrumental, obviously, in picking and helping to fund and campaigning for pro-life candidates. What kind of progress are you making? How are the midterms shaping up?
Well, pardon me, today's outcome in the Roe versus Wade decision really raises the stakes in the midterm elections. Voters are going to debate and decide this issue at home, and they deserve to know where every candidate stands in America, including those who towed the Democratic Party line of extreme abortion, abortion up until birth paid for by taxpayer dollars. So now we're going to move this to the state ballot box, and those discussions can be closest to home.
So how granular is your organization? How deep into local races do you venture? Because the states are in the driver's seat right now.
They certainly are. And Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America does get involved at the state level. We've been talking to, long before today, but we've been talking to state governors and attorneys general and lawmakers across the country to prepare for this day and to understand what their role will be going forward. And you've seen many state attorneys general or governors make proclamations today about what will happen in their states. And that'll continue in the next few days, as well as the next 30 to 60 to 90 days, as they'll ask for their court cases to be released or injunctions to be lifted as we move forward at the state level. But I also want to mention that we're still very involved at the federal level. We're involved in the very important U.S. Senate races, races for House of Representatives and Congress, because the federal level, they still have quite an important role to provide the states. There'll still be some guidelines that need to be enacted for the country as the states debate this. Even in a state that's going to be pro-choice, like New York or California, there could still be some guardrails on limits on when babies feel pain, or even a national heartbeat bill or life at conception protection. So the federal level isn't out of it yet. It's a very important role, but at the state level, we know that that's where the people are going to have the most intimate discussions, debates, and votes for their state elected representatives.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the federal level. I'm glad you brought up the federal level issues, because there is already talk in Congress among some Democrats of impeaching Supreme Court justices for this vote. So, you know, if they control both houses of Congress after these midterms, you're going to have that kind of a fight on your hand, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see all kinds of desperate measures offered by, especially the Democratic Party, which has such an extreme agenda. I think that we're very confident that polling shows that this is not popular among people. Even pro-choice people don't like late-term abortion, for example, and most voters don't want their taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions, for example, and there's much more. But it doesn't win with the voters. I think that their ideology may be tested today. Their political platforms may have been destroyed, but the further they go, I think the worse it will play with the voters.
Now that we're in the aftermath of this decision, you've got to wonder how much momentum the Democrats may gain from this decision. They were relatively uninspired. The constant repetition of bad news about the economy, the aftermath of the COVID lockdowns have all been spelling bad news for Democratic candidates. Might this give them the impetus to succeed in the midterms? And how does it compare to the momentum that you've been able to provide your candidates?
I'm not sure that they are similar. Our candidates have the momentum because a majority of Americans believe in protecting life and understand that unborn children are human beings deserving of protection. I also believe that if they're looking at the same polling and information we are, that voters are fed up with the current agenda of the administration and of the extreme positions in Congress. Their pocketbooks are hurting. Their 401ks are falling. Their families are suffering. Children in schools, I mean, you name it. And so I think there's going to be some answering to do. There's going to be some splaining to do at the polls.
Well, I'm curious about the polls.
I don't know that this is going to do that.
Yeah, I'm curious about the polls, especially when they pertain to abortion and pro-abortion, anti-abortion, whatever, because the numbers are so varied depending on how the question is phrased. So when you say that Americans are opposed to abortion or, or pro-life or pro-choice, it just varies tremendously. What polls do you cite?
Well, it does vary, although people understand the value of protecting human life. It depends on how you ask the question, and that's true with all polls. It also depends on the question being asked in terms of limits on abortion or degrees of abortion. Yes. Unfortunately, abortion doesn't have degrees in that it kills an unborn child and wounds a mother for her lifetime. And so I think people are aware of that, but they're also very aware of their pocketbooks and their gas prices and all kinds of other things that go along with this agenda that they're wanting, that the extreme Democrat position wants to keep going, that doesn't appear to be doing our economy or our families any good. So
how does this Supreme Court decision today change the work that you're doing to enlist new candidates, new pro-life candidates?
You know, an entirely new pro-life movement starts today. We're ready to go on offense for life, and every single one of those legislative bodies, whether in the states, will still be involved in Washington, of course, as I mentioned. And over the next few years, we'll still be available and we'll still be focusing on saving as many lives as we can. We're going to build a pro-life safety net for women at risk, women in crisis pregnancies needing assistance, services, support, and empowerment. Abortion does not empower women. Support and guidance and assistance empowers women and their families to succeed. And going forward now, whether it's a state that outlaws abortion outright, or whether it's a state with other kinds of limits, or even states that will have abortion up until birth, the important thing that we do going forward with this new conversation about the value of life is also the value of women's lives and supporting women and their families going forward. So we're going to see us doing some new and different things to help women and families in our country.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, because one of the obligations, it seems to me, of the pro-life movement at this point is, if indeed abortion is limited and there are women who would have chosen abortion and said, now have children, a lot of those women are probably not prepared to be good parents, and there are probably going to be a lot of children who need adoption or need services outside the immediate family, because the immediate family is incredibly dysfunctional. And one of the worst things you can do to a child is have a child raised in a family that doesn't want that child. So can you get a little bit more granular on what precisely it is you want to do?
I can. But I can also, what I would also suggest to you is that many people grow up in families where there are obstacles, but at least they got a chance to grow up instead of be killed because they weren't wanted. And so that's where we wrap our hands around, as we've done, as we always do, around people in need in our communities. You know, the pro-life movement, this isn't new to us. We have been, over the last 50 years and prior to that, helping build and supporting and loving on the almost 3,000 pregnancy care centers that are a network around this country. There are services through Catholic social services and neuromaternity homes, and there are women's care centers, all of which have served to serve millions of women over the past 50 years. During the pandemic, it was the pro-life movement that went online and had diapers sent to women's care places. And so it's nothing new for the pro-life community to wrap their arms around the women and the families that need help, and we will continue to do so until every single life is protected in this country. Well,
that's really great to hear, because pro-life people really do need to step up in the aftermath of this decision. Sue, one last question before we let you go. Did you ever expect to see this day would come?
You know, as I'm getting older and have been working in this for quite some time, I wasn't sure. There were days. But I know that I serve a big Lord and a great God, and with a lot of wonderful and caring people. Wonderful and caring. We make we say about politicians and this and that, about politics in this country, but there are some wonderful people who have made this happen. And I get to see the good side of that every day, where people have been trying to save lives, save families, and move forward in a way that's respectful in the United States of America. We want to respect and protect life at every turn. And I'm very pleased to see it. It is a life change. It is a life moment for me personally, and for I think all future unborn children in this country.
Sue Liebel, we really appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Another live shot here just outside the Supreme Court building. The political reaction to today's High Court ruling suggests that this fight really has only just begun. The tone from leading Democrats was curiously absent of the kind of reluctant acceptance one often hears in the aftermath of unfavorable court decisions. There was no, we disagree with the decision, but we respect the decision. Instead, an angry tone was set from the very top.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans, but they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Well, never mind that abortion and the right to abortion was never mentioned in the Constitution. At least the president did, however, appeal for nonviolent protests.
I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable.
Speaker Pelosi was even less accepting in a morning press conference right after the Supreme Court decision today. She told reporters this morning the radical Supreme Court, that's the word she used, the radical Supreme Court is eviscerating American rights and endangering their health and safety. She made no mention of over 60 million aborted babies since the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, whose health, safety, and very lives were not just endangered, but were ended. And former President Barack Obama himself, a politician, tweeted the court relegated abortion, quote, to the whims of politicians and ideologues. He said the decision attacked essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Again, no mention of the millions of babies denied freedom and life. And perhaps most alarming was the statement of the nation's chief law enforcement officer, Attorney General Merrick Garland, the man who, in contradiction to federal law, has made no arrests of protesters at the homes of justices. Today, he again thumbed his nose at the law, tweeting, quote, the Justice Department will work tirelessly to protect and advance reproductive freedom. One critic suggests that Garland's phrasing there suggests a potential Democratic legal challenge based on a theory that abortion may qualify as interstate commerce that cannot be regulated by the states. That, as the Disney Corporation announced that it would provide free transportation to its employees for abortion services to other states should Florida outlaw the practice. And in a show of irony, one progressive member of Congress, a familiar face, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was apparently oblivious to our country's 3 co-equal branches of government. She went to the Supreme Court and chanted illegitimate in front of the one branch of government that she doesn't particularly care for. Joining us now, Jordan Sekulow, the Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, to help us break down the Supreme Court's decision, the claim that the left has been making about the unconstitutionality of the decision, and what happens next in the fight for life in the post-Roe era. Jordan, good to see you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a tweet made by President Biden just a little while ago. He said in the tweet, "Today is a very solemn moment for the United States. The Supreme Court expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized." Did they do that?
No, in fact, I think what the Supreme Court did today was clarify what has been nearly 50 years of an argument that was very unclear. You had every time a state tried to put in a restriction or rule on abortion, it had to go back through a court process, but it wasn't about the political or legislative process. So it didn't matter who you elected in your state on this issue of abortion. It mattered who were in the courts, and the courts went back and forth. You know, some partial birth abortion bans were constitutional. Other partial birth abortion bans weren't constitutional. And so issues like that, how do you get this out of the courts? So we've known from the beginning, and that the proponents of Roe versus Wade have known since Roe versus Wade, it's very difficult to argue in favor of constitutionally. If you go back to the oral arguments, where do you find this right? Of course, it's not expressly in the Constitution, but even if you read into the Constitution this right to privacy, there is another competing right here that the court recognized today. And it's not just about the individual receiving an abortion, but it's also the competing right of the child that is also in the womb. And they're recognizing that states have an interest in not only protecting the person who might be seeking an abortion, but the person inside the womb and protecting them. And so they did not fully declare personhood of the unborn child. They've returned this back to the states so that the people's representatives will be able to decide, and they'll be able to have that input on what kind of restrictions are in place. I think we're going to see very different reactions in different states across the country.
Right. So what is the ultimate intention of the Democrats? President Biden is not the only one making that argument about having a constitutional right revoked by the Supreme Court. We've heard it from former President Barack Obama. We've heard it from Speaker Pelosi. We've heard it from Senate Majority Leader Schumer. What's their intention here? Is it to set the table for another Supreme Court challenge? Is it to delegitimize the high court? What are your thoughts?
I think they definitely want to delegitimize the courts. I think we're going to hear again about court packing, you know, adding more justices to the court, that somehow this is not this court is illegitimate. We saw that was the chant outside of the court today by AOC and some other members of the more liberal wing of Congress. But ultimately here, this is a Supreme Court decision. And I want to say, there were a lot of people out there who fought hard to get these justices confirmed, whether you start with President Trump nominating these justices. You think about Justice Barrett. There was a lot of controversy there over the timing of that. And you got to think about what people like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham did to get that nomination through. But ultimately, and also decide not to no longer have the filibuster, the 60-vote threshold to get those nominations through, which started with Justice Gorsuch, the first nomination by President Trump. So ultimately here today, what we saw was the court, I think, correcting history by saying we got this wrong. We have gotten cases wrong in the past, especially cases involving civil rights early on, and the court has come back and said it doesn't matter that we got this wrong for 50 years. If we got it wrong, we need to correct it. And ultimately, we're now going to be able to have this debate outside of the federal courts and back in Washington, D.C. But obviously, the politicians, especially on the left, are going to make this about, trying to make this about a November midterm political issue. and try to somehow convince people that this is a parade of horribles coming. But I think what realistic people, and that's what I'm trying to be for the audience today, know that this will now be a debate that goes back to your state. Some states will have laws that go into force today, Doug, that are similar to the Mississippi law that was upheld. That is an abortion ban starting at 15 weeks. And so some states have done that. Other states that are states with very conservative governments, they've got to go through a constitutional amendment process. It's going to be a little bit longer. So I think that for everybody out there, it's a huge day for those who, like us, who have fought for life. And we want to celebrate that. And we then are prepared for the next battle.
You know, in some respects, it strikes me that this was the only decision the High Court could have come to, given, and this is the key part, the sheer divisiveness that exists in our country right now. We're a divided country. This is the biggest division that exists in a country plagued by divisions. And the best way that the court could try to resolve that or find some sort of peace among the factions is to let the states decide. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that taking this out of Washington, D.C., taking this out of the federal courts is exactly where you want to have this debate, because then you get to talk to their direct representatives at the state level, state courts, state constitutions. Listen, some states are going to do things I don't agree with, that a lot of us who are pro-life don't like. States like New York are already doing it, California. And then there's going to be states we have battles in, states like Michigan and some of these others that are kind of purple states. But I think that, today, ultimately, what the court has said is let the people decide, because there's a competing interest here. They didn't go so far yet as saying that life of the unborn child is 100% equal interest, but that it is a competing interest that we can decide that at the state level. And you're not going to battle this out in federal court. That was very clear today from the opinion, is that there's no constitutional right here. There's no federal right here. So this is going to be in the states. I think people will pay a lot more attention to their state legislators, to their governors, but also to how their state courts are made up, which is very different in every state. How those, because this has not been an issue it's been all in federal court. That is now, it's going to be unique to have these battles at the state level, and we're excited about the ACLJ. And I got to thank TBN as well, because they've been with us since the very beginning on this issue, allowing us just to talk about it. This was just something people didn't even talk about, in the 1970s when the Roe versus Wade came out. Even having the discussion about, is this right, morally, legally, constitutionally? And we got to this point today because of organizations like TBN.
Well, I'm sure everybody here really appreciates that comment. Let's talk about how this is going to be presented in the media. We are in the minority. The kind of voice you hear on this network, Fox News and a few others, is in the minority. The vast majority of Americans who get their news from the mainstream outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, you name it, this is going to, the perception, if not the actual facts as reported by those networks, will be that Supreme Court has outlawed abortion in one fell swoop. How do you combat that kind of misinformation?
So we have been preparing for this long before the leaked opinion, that if this day were to come, what do we do? So we've created, we have a C4 organization, we have our legal organization to go out into the states to have this debate with people. Now, the immediate, of course, you've got the immediate Washington, D.C. political reaction. And a lot of that, again, is about political votes, midterm elections. We're thinking bigger than that at the ACLJ, because we believe this is a life that we're talking about here and protecting life. So I think what you have to do is go to the states. First of all, is educate people on the truth. The truth is today, if your state had very broad abortion laws yesterday, those laws are still in place today. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's the truth, that the Supreme Court did not invalidate New York's abortion laws. What they said is, don't come to this federal government. This is not where the right exists, and that we shouldn't have created that right in the first place. We got it wrong, and this goes back to you to have this debate in your community at the state level. I think once people take a deep breath and realize that, then some people might not have been as engaged in this issue, or might not, it's an uncomfortable issue sometimes to engage in. And I think some of us take that for granted who are very active in this issue, because it's been a very Washington-focused, federal-focused issue. And now we take it back to the state, back to your community, back to your church, your place of worship. Have the discussion there. Talk about what laws you want to support in your state, And some of that, again, I think it's going to be happening as we speak right now, Doug, and others, that'll be longer-term battles. But I do think what's great is this, and people, just a reality check. The only two countries in the world that allowed abortion the way the United States did, with basically no restrictions at the national level, and we had some of these states had some different laws, were North Korea and China. We're no longer part of that club anymore. And I think that's something we can all be proud of in the United States. If you look at the other countries, even the Western European countries people think are so liberal, they have the exact same kind of laws as Mississippi's already, or more restrictive on the books. So we are actually becoming today more mainstream in the world, and we're no longer associated with some of the worst human rights abusers in the world.
Right. We're much more in line with many of the European countries as a result of the Supreme Court decision. Before we leave, I want to ask you about the protests outside the Justice's home, because it seems to me that, and a lot of people are criticizing the Justice Department for having a highly politicized interpretation of those protests. There have been no arrests, even though federal law clearly states that the intimidation of a judge is illegal, punishable by a fine or up to a year in jail. Your thoughts about that, and are these protests going to get worse, and will the Justice Department finally act?
I do think it will get worse, because a lot of these politicians are egging it on. So instead of saying, hey, in the United States, we don't allow, we're free speech guys at the ACLJ, and we support free speech. We support a lot of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, and fight for that in court. A lot of pro-life protesters who have chained themselves to the door that have to bring attention to this issue. But it's peaceful still, but they still they were violating the law. They knew what they were doing. Here we have the law. They are violating the law, but the Department of Justice won't enforce it. And this is one of those areas where it's not it's protected free speech right to try and influence a judge with threats or pounding on drums. And so I think we're going to unfortunately continue to see that. I hope and pray that we don't see riots tonight. I think some of that might, we will see if that actually occurs. I know that, there will be protests. That's nothing unusual for Washington or major cities around the country on a huge issue like this. But I pray that was just, some of that is the left almost hoping that people will turn violent over this issue, when I think most folks on both sides understand the protest. We respect that in the United States of America. But yes, the Department of Justice did not have to allow this. I mean, we got to a point, we had an assassination attempt on a justice of the Supreme Court, and they still didn't step in to stop the out-of-control feeling outside of some of their homes.
Jordan, last question. You were a key part of Donald Trump's impeachment defense team, along with your dad. Have you had a chance to speak to him? This is clearly Donald Trump's legacy now. Any chance you've had to speak to him? I haven't seen any statements from him.
We have a call into him because, again, he was bold, and he was put forward these nominees, whether Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, sticking with Brett Kavanaugh, where a lot of, I think, presidents would not have stuck with him through that process when they restarted with those allegations that were so bogus, and ultimately, and with Justice Barrett as well, who, remember, it was Dianne Feinstein who said, oh, the dogma lives deeply within her. I think ultimately here, choosing her as a nominee after Justice Ginsburg had passed away, he was, I saw in this first statement he said today, and I thought this was so unique for any former leader, because he can take a lot of credit for this. He deserves a lot of credit for this. But he actually gave the credit to God in his first statement today. And I think that it sends chills a little bit in a good way, because you think about I think he understands, too, the enormity of the situation. So we had the phone call going in today, because he has a lot that, again, he could take most of the credit for this. There's been a long fight. I mean, there's been so many people, like I said, TBN along the way, since 1973, protesters in the churches, in the communities, politicians, legal groups like ours. And ultimately, it takes bold leaders to put bold people in place. And that's how we got to the decision today, where I can say to you, Roe versus Wade has been overturned. And this is not fantasy that we're talking about.
Jordan, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Doug.
And still to come on Centerpoint, we're going to be speaking to the Mississippi state legislator who crafted the law, which was the basis of today's Supreme Court decision. That coming up. In the meantime, let's check in with our Erick Stakelbeck. He's in Washington, just outside the Supreme Court, for the latest on the situation there. What's the latest, Erick?
Doug, still a whole lot of heated rhetoric here at the Supreme Court by this pro-abortion demonstration. I'm listening to these speeches, terms like fascist being thrown around, referring to the United States. None too happy. They're saying they're not going to accept this decision by the Supreme Court. Now, still about 1,000 people here. We'll see if that kind of dwindles once it gets dark, but there is a whole lot of security here, Doug. We've seen a heavy presence, not only with the Capitol Police, where we are right now, but really throughout the city. I arrived here in D.C. by train today, and right away it was very noticeable, not only in D.C., but the surrounding suburbs. Doug, I know you know this area very well. It's your hometown. Northern Virginia, Maryland, all on high alert, all in anticipation, God forbid, of some kind of violence. And another question here, Doug, again, we've got a long weekend here now, not only tonight, where some pro-abortion groups are calling for a night of rage, but Doug, what about this Sunday? We have seen church services disrupted in recent weeks after the leak of Justice Alito's opinion on the Roe v. Wade case. We've seen churches vandalized. Could churches be targeted in some form this Sunday? I think that's a major concern. There have been open threats, for instance, against Catholic churches as well. So this is only the beginning, perhaps, what we see right now, and as we move on when it gets dark tonight.
And that could be happening anywhere in the country, Eric. You make a great point. There already have been some protests, actually during church services, of people, you know, taking their clothes off and things of that sort. Protest, just vile kind of stuff. And we got to keep our eyes open for that sort of thing. And we'll be back to you a little bit later. I guess we've got still another 2 hours of daylight in Washington. When the sun goes down, that's when we need to be more concerned.
Yes, and the rhetoric is certainly very heated here, Doug, and getting more heated by the minute.
Okay. We'll keep our eyes open. Back with more of Centerpoint after this.
The songs, the stories, the legacy. Join award-winning artist and songwriter Bill Gaither for an intimate conversation and journey through special moments that defined and impacted Christian music.
And this is the first time we've sat down kind of knee to knee. If life was a lesson, what did you learn?
Life is a vapor. It's here today and it's gone quickly. I thank God for this moment.
Hey guys, did you know that you can get the exciting TBN newsletter sent directly to you by taking a picture with your cell phone of this big QR code that's on your screen right now? Here's how. TBN's free monthly newsletter will give you an encouraging snapshot each month of all the upcoming and inspiring programs.
What God is asking you to do is become more like Him.
If God's people are not going to show the world around us Jesus, who's going to do it?
Sneak peeks at new series like The Chosen.
This is different. Get used to different.
Vital programming and resource offers for each member of your family and much more. And if an article catches your attention, just take a picture of the QR code with your phone's camera, and it will take you right to that content.
Hey, it's got to be done.
So sign up today. Just go to tbn.org/signup or take a picture of the big QR code on your screen now, and never miss another colorful, interactive TBN newsletter.
As you have heard, today's decision was based on the Dobbs case in Mississippi. Well, the woman who authored the Mississippi legislation that would find its way up to the Supreme Court is with us tonight. Yes, her bill has saved the lives of literally millions of babies. Joining us now is Mississippi Representative Becky Curry. Becky, good to see you.
Good to see you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I kind of feel like I'm a gold miner, and I've been digging through lots and lots of layers of sediment, and I just found the gold nugget, and there you are, right there. So you're kind of ground zero here. What was your inspiration for moving ahead with this legislation in Mississippi?
Well, I have been pro-life most of my life, and I'm a registered nurse, and graduated from nursing school in 1979 and went to work in labor and delivery. And I had a lady that had a hard time carrying a baby to term. I unfortunately delivered many of her children in the early 80s. It was not technology is not where it is today. And she would deliver her babies, and I delivered one that was around 15 weeks. And this baby was a little girl, and it wanted to live. And I sat there. My job was after delivery to put the baby in a Tupperware container and send it to the lab, which is where this normally goes. And this baby's heart just kept beating, and she kept trying to live. And I prayed with this baby, and it's just always stuck with me. So in Mississippi, we wrote in 2016, we wrote a 19-week bill. And in 2018, we decided to take another chip at Roe v. Wade and wrote the 15-week gestational age act bill, which now you know is the Dobbs bill.
So that's your story of where this came from. I'm just curious. I don't want to delve too deeply into that, obviously, or belabor the point. But was the baby on a table? Were you holding that baby at that time? Was it on a table?
Yeah, the baby. We delivered the baby and showed it to the mother, and she and I left the room with the baby because I realized that the heart was still beating, and I didn't want to do all of those things in front of her. So I left the room with the baby and had it on some surgical towels and sat there until the baby passed away.
If I can read from an article that you wrote about why you moved ahead with this decision to set this Mississippi law, quote, Mississippi's decision to protect preborn life after 15 weeks is consistent with what the vast majority of countries worldwide already do, protect preborn life at 12 weeks or earlier. This pro-life policy isn't extreme by any measure. What is extreme is the outdated and unconstitutional standard established by Roe v. Wade. And then you go on to say, the U.S. is only one of 7 nations that permit abortion on demand after 20 weeks of pregnancy. That puts us in the company of China and North Korea. No, thank you, end quote.
That's right. And, you know, we don't want to be with those countries. And, you know, there was never a constitutional right to abortion. I think that all of that was propaganda from the left, and they had the Supreme Court for a long time. And, you know, we had a president that was conservative, that was able to appoint 3 conservative justices to the court, or we wouldn't be here today. So, you know, God played a hand in this, and you can tell step by step that this bill was going to be passed, and it was going to go all the way. And I always felt good about this bill. It was a absolutely good bill that no nonsense and just went to the core of the matter. And now it's back to the states where it should be.
Right. Did you ever imagine that after you introduced this bill that it would get this far, to the point that it would result in the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
No, I didn't. After the bill was passed and signed by the governor, it immediately was struck down in the courts. And we, you know, I went back to work as a nurse, and 2 years later, I got a call saying, guess what? Your bill is going before the Supreme Court. Just like many other bills that we had written and passed, I just assumed it would stay, you know, in the drawer like the rest of them.
Describe your feeling the moment you got the news that the Roe v. Wade had been overturned this morning.
You know, it's just been surreal. You know, when we got the leak and I thought could really happen, you know, I've kind of been living with this for a few weeks, but, you know, it's just hard to sink in that after 50 years and all the work we've done, this has finally happened. I'm guessing it will sink in after today. I hope so, but I'm so proud of Mississippi. We're a conservative state, and that we led the way in getting this done. Now that the work is done, the hard work is done, another obstacle lies before you, and I've asked every guest on our show tonight about that. I'll again quote from the article you wrote. If we're going to protect preborn life, which I pray we will, we must also step up to the plate for vulnerable women across the country. We must show up with real, sustainable support. How do you propose to do that? Well, in Mississippi, we have some of the poorest, some of the unhealthiest. We have a long way to go. And I have to tell you something. I've proposed lots of legislation that has been not listened to and not passed because of some of the men that run our state. You know, we have got to make sure that women have access to health care. We've got to make sure that they have access to birth control. I don't want a woman ever to be in the position of having to decide whether she's going to have an abortion or not because she didn't have money to go to the doctor to get birth control pills, or she didn't have money to you know, make sure that her health and welfare were her number one choice. I don't want anybody to have to face this. And then after you're faced with it, then we need to make sure that you're able to support yourself, support your children. You know, we have done some things here in Mississippi. If you want to be a nurse or you want to be a teacher or you want to be a doctor, many careers that the state of Mississippi will pick up the tab. We want education not to be a hindrance to people who want to have their children and be able to support them. We've got to make sure that healthcare, like I said, we are a very rural state. We have got to make sure that people have access to healthcare. So today, I have to tell you, we have a lot of work to do, and I'm overwhelmed by the amount of work there is left to do. And I make a promise that I'm going to fight just as hard for access to health care as I did for overturning Roe v.
Do you have support among conservative Republican colleagues in the Mississippi State Legislature to do just that?
I do. We have more support than if we can get the bill out for a vote, they will support it. I've had a hard time getting the bills past leadership to have a vote.
Well, I bet this will change it, this decision by the Supreme Court today. What kind of adoption services are available in Mississippi? And is that something that you plan to include in moving forward?
We passed a bill last year to make adoption less expensive. And we don't want to make it to where we willy-nilly put children in homes that they're not safe or are taken care of. We want to make sure that they are. But we passed some laws to make sure that adoption is absolutely more of a viable option than it ever has been before. You know, there's so many people who are looking to adopt babies and have a terrible time. You know, go to China or Russia for adoption when we have children right here that need good, loving homes. And we need to make sure that that's accessible to them.
And Becky, on a more difficult subject right now, because your decision to introduce this bill has now led to this Supreme Court decision, have you received any threats, any violence, any vandalism along the way? And do you fear that now?
Well, you know, I hope not. I have received ugly emails. You know, I've lost some family members who, you know, it was pretty rough around the last Thanksgiving table at my house, but that's okay. You know, I know that I'm doing the right thing, and I know that we'll move forward and things will be better. We've got to change hearts and minds, and I know we have a long way to go, and I am willing to do the hard work to get there. But I have not received any threats. I've had my local law enforcement tell me they're looking out for me. But, you know, I hope that doesn't happen. We'll see. I know that there's a lot of people on the other side of this that are not happy.
Well, even at the risk of losing family members or not being able to associate with them so much, you have really taken a courageous stand about this, and we appreciate it. I know the viewers of TBN most definitely appreciate it. Becky Curry, member of the Mississippi House of Representatives, thanks for your work. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Here at TBN, reactions have been coming in from across the country, including from best-selling author Max Lucado, who had this to say about the court's decision.
Hi, everybody. Max Lucado here. You know, the surprising reversal of Roe versus Wade, well, it's welcome news for advocates of preborn lives. We can be very, very grateful. But let's also be very, very prayerful. This decision will trigger the need for the church to respond to women in need. So let's move quickly to support the organizations that promote women's health and provide maternal support. May the Lord bless his church with compassionate, generous, and servant-minded hearts as we enter into this new era.
Joining us now, Dr. Robert Jeffress, the senior pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Doug.
This has got to be a good day for you.
It's a historic day. And you know, today is primarily not a victory for Republicans or conservatives. It's a victory for the millions of yet-to-be-born children who are going to have an opportunity to live out their God-ordained lives because of today's decision. And I don't think we can overestimate how much of a spiritual victory this is as well. We have a church in downtown Dallas just a few blocks away from where the original Roe v. Wade was first held in a federal courtroom. And every year for the last 8 years, we've had a group go down to that old courtroom on the Sunday closest to the January Roe decision and pray that it would one day be overturned. This last January, they went down to pray, and the new old owner of the building told them this would be the last year he was going to allow them to come in to pray. And that was a foretelling, I think, of the great victory we saw today.
You know, we hear it said again and again in our culture today, our decaying culture, that we live in a culture of death. It's a common phrase.
Yes.
This is an affirmation of life, this Supreme Court decision. Explain to me how that affirmation of life and prenatal life can translate our culture in a broader sense from a culture of death into a culture of life. How does it manifest itself beyond the simple act of the birth of a child into something broader?
Well, I think what's important to understand is this idea that life is sacred applies to life not only in the womb but outside the womb. I think the shootings we've seen in Uvalde and in Buffalo, and these are an extension of what happens when you don't value life, when you think life is an accident, and when you think there's no one to whom we're accountable. I think the challenge for those of us who are conservatives are to be consistent and to say, okay, we are protecting life inside the womb. We want to support mothers and children outside of the womb as well. I think it's a case for churches like mine to step up and offer the care that we need to offer to make life more of a viable option for moms.
That wasn't my next question. I think it's incumbent upon people who are pro-life and who have professed pro-life ideas, and for Christians, to truly step up. I mean, you got to say to people, if you really believe in this, maybe you should adopt a child who's unwanted in the inner city or in Appalachia or wherever it may be. Maybe you need to help finance a pregnancy center. Maybe you need to help provide security at a pregnancy center. These kinds of things. What else can your parishioners do and people of faith do?
Well, I think everything you suggested is legitimate, and those of us who are conservative believers ought to step up. But I think it's incumbent upon us to also put pressure on the government, whether it's a Republican government or a Democrat government, to use some of these trillions of dollars of tax dollars they collect and earmark them to care for women. Let's see how much the left really cares about the plight of women. How many dollars are they willing to give to support women who need financial support now that they are going to give birth? And I think this is something that we, whether we're here in Texas with a Republican government or whether it's New York, I think Americans need to come together and demand that government offer the necessary support for moms and their children.
Pro-life people say that one of the potential downsides of this is that we'll see a proliferation of the abortion pill manifesting itself, something that's very technically much more simple in terms of inducing an abortion than actually the procedure of an abortion. It creates miscarriage, in effect, the same bodily reaction that a miscarriage does. And so it's easier done without a doctor's care, I suppose not without risk. But we can't stop drugs coming across the southern border. How are we going to stop the abortion pill from coming across the border?
Well, I think your point is well made, and I think it pretends the fact that the battle is not over. It's going to be fought on so many different levels. It's going to be fought on the state level. Instead of fighting it just with the federal government, we're going to have 50 battles waging in 50 different states right now over abortion. And things like abortion-inducing drugs, these are just going to be a part, one of the fronts of a multi-front war we're going to be fighting for years. And I would say to Christians watching right now, yes, let's thank God for today's victory, but let's not grow weary in well-doing. This is only starting.
I want to turn to the protests we've been seeing outside justices' homes. I suspect that will probably ramp up. It rankles me just as a person who's always believed that a man's home or a woman's home is his or her castle, off limits for protests. How should Christians handle that? The government apparently isn't. There's no arrest at these things. The federal government, the Department of Justice has turned a blind eye. Would counter-protests help? Your thoughts?
Well, I think the left has shown its hypocrisy. I mean, they barely cared about Kavanaugh's threat, and when conservatives are threatened, they seem to have little concern about it. Look, I think we who are conservative and taking this position, we need to be careful. We need to certainly be secure. I think churches need to be on high alert. We're always on high alert at First Baptist Dallas, but we need to realize...
Have you had any threats, vandalism, anything of that sort?
You know, during the protests that were rampant in so many cities a year and a half ago, we were vandalized. We had some protesters come and try to do harm to our church, and we're very vigilant. And I think that's part of being pro-life, is protecting not just the life of the unborn, but protecting the lives of adults and Christians whose lives are being threatened. Remember, Jesus said Satan is a murderer. He is the thief who comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And right now, he's the prince of the power of the air. He won't always be, but we need to be aware of his tactics.
Let's turn to politics a little bit. Some have said this is going to energize the left for the midterm elections. This all could be upended if in fact it does energize the left. How much will it energize the left?
I can't predict how much the left will be energized. I think what is important is for conservative, Bible-believing Christians to be energized. Now, I just wrote a piece for Fox News about elections have consequences. And the fact is, there's one reason from a human point of view that today's victory took place, and it's because in 2016, evangelicals banded together and elected a president who kept his promise to appoint 3 pro-life justices to the Supreme Court. You know, you contrast that, Doug, to what happened 83 years ago. The reason Adolf Hitler rose to power and was able to murder 6 million Jews was Christians in Germany, for the most part, remained quiet. They said, we can't get involved in politics. We're just going to preach the gospel. Fortunately, Christians today didn't stay quiet when there was a Holocaust on the unborn. And because they spoke up and they voted their convictions, we have the decision we have today. And I said recently on television, you know, the left and the right agree on one thing. If Donald Trump had lost the election and Hillary Clinton were president today, Roe v. Wade would be safe.
Well, indeed, this is Donald Trump's legacy. This Supreme Court decision is Donald Trump's legacy. On that note, I asked you off camera, do you expect him to run again?
You know, I have never tried to guess what President Trump is going to do. I will be eternally grateful to him for what he's done. I consider him a friend, and if it's God's will for him to be president again, I would be very happy.
Dr. Robert Jeffress, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Great to talk to you, Doug. Thanks.
And coming up next, a TBN exclusive with the pro-life attorney who wrote the legal briefs that went to the Supreme Court and helped overturn Roe v. Wade.
Mark your calendars for a TBN Independence Day special. God bless America again. Join me, Pastor Alan Jackson, and our guests as we honor the biblical values present in our earliest days as a nation. Celebrate what makes the country remarkable. And let's pledge our allegiance to Jesus and his principles. We must find the courage to lead with our faith without any apology.
Welcome to Fiji. You can't do a roll-in this part of the world without coming off the beautiful water and experiencing what we're experiencing today. The subject, Christian television in the islands of the sea. You're helping with MyTV now. You're a part CEO of MyTV.
TBN is very impacting Fiji ways back, and not only me impacted. There are a lot of pastors, leaders that they feed from TBN.
Now we have an opportunity to come to Fiji to cover the islands with the gospel of hope and grace. We're just excited about what God is doing here.
We would love to bring those quality contents, the dramas that has moral in it. Even if they don't hear it from anybody else, they can watch it on the television station.
Joining us now is the Chief Legal Officer for Americans United for Life, Stephen Aden. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Doug.
I'm glad we have you as a guest because you can help us to clarify what appears to be a central argument that Democrats are making in the aftermath of this Supreme Court decision, which is that they've undone a constitutional right in overturning Roe v. Wade. Is that the case?
No, not at all. What the court has done is recognize that there never was a constitutional right to abortion, and that Roe versus Wade in 1973 actually manufactured that so-called right out of whole cloth. What the court today has done is restore constitutional integrity and restore to the people the power to protect human life, and we expect that the states will move forward to do that.
There is a provision that Democrats would have in a case like this, and it's the constitutional amendment process, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, 2/3 of the vote of both houses of Congress, followed by ratification of 3/4 of the states, state legislatures or a state convention. Is that correct? And why are they so neglectful of mentioning that?
I think they're gravely mistaken. The people in this nation would like to see elective abortion ended. The pro-life movement is not going to drop the mic and take a victory lap with this decision. We all understand that the goal is to end abortion in America. We believe that this decision today gets us to the 50-yard line, but we're not stopping there. It empowers the people through the states and through the U.S. Congress to protect human life, but they have to take up that authority and move forward with it. And we look forward to working with them to do that. The constitutional amendment process, as you said, requires 2/3 of both houses of the Congress and then 3/4 of the states. That's 38 states. That may seem like a difficult prospect, but recall that the overturn of Roe seemed like a difficult prospect for most of the 49 years that it's been in existence. This is a generational fight, just as the fight to overturn Roe is a generational fight. And the movement will not stop until we accomplish an abortion-free America. We do not believe that America can truly long endure as a nation, as a republic, if half the states believe there's a fundamental right to destroy life from the womb, and the other half call it murder.
You said that the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision was made out of whole cloth. Dive into the weeds a little bit on that for me. Explain why what you've written in several briefs in support of overturning the law suggests that it was made out of whole cloth.
Yes, in fact, the Supreme Court's opinion cited to our senior fellow Clark Forsyth's book, Abuse of Discretion, in saying that, because as Justice Byron White said in dissent in Roe versus Wade, this was a raw exercise of judicial power. They did this because they could. They had enough votes to gin up a right that had never been considered out of precedent that really didn't apply. And so shortly after Roe versus Wade came out, for example, the dean of Yale Law School, who was not pro-life, he was pro-choice, John Hart Ely, came out with an article that said that Roe was not a constitutional decision and made no pretense of being one. It was simply an exercise of judicial usurpation of the democratic process. Liberal scholars across the board have recognized that for decades, and yet Roe has stubbornly persisted, narrowly being upheld in 1992, and the court very nearly struck it down, and whittled away at, chipped away at over all these years until it is now and was a shadow of its former self. While the movement has been working hard, case by case, law by law, to rebuild protections for mothers and for life in the womb over these 50 years. I'm very proud to be part of that movement, and this is a historic day for all of us.
Well, now, you wrote several of the briefs in this particular case, correct? What was the point, if you can,
yes,
the overarching point that you tried to make in those briefs?
Right. Abortion advocates say that Roe versus Wade is settled law. Well, Americans United for Life was proud to file a brief with the Supreme Court on behalf of 228 members of Congress who told the court it's time for Roe to go. That doesn't sound very settled to me. We also filed a scholarly brief, again by my colleague Clark Forsyth, that was cited by the opinion in the case by Justice Alito, that explained exactly how and why this right to abortion was not in the Constitution, and that the adherence to precedent does not require sticking with it. It's unworkable. It's not historic. It creates more problems than it solves, and certainly it does not recognize the fundamental truth of what Justice Alito said early in his decision today, that abortion is different because abortion involves the destruction of an innocent human life.
You mentioned a quote, the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973 was the raw exercise of judicial power. A lot of Americans are troubled by it because it seems to them that the entire judiciary, whether it's the Supreme Court down to lower courts, is becoming increasingly an exercise in raw judicial power, heavily politicized. Do you see that? And is it a storm cloud on the horizon?
If that's true, it's largely true because of Roe versus Wade. It's true because the Supreme Court arrogated to itself the power to determine by a majority of 7 men at the time that abortion was some kind of super fundamental right. Since then, we've had protests in the streets. We've had very contentious nomination hearings for Supreme Court justices, including the characters of good men and women assassinated in that process because people who support abortion didn't want a pro-life justice on the court. That is all because of Roe. And I think that this majority in the Dobbs case today recognized that and understood that getting the court out of the business of being the nation's abortion control board, as the court has said in the past, was important for the health of the court. It's important to restore to the court its rightful position as the interpreter of appropriate constitutional texts and language and intention, and to abandon this made-up fallacy that the court launched in 1973. And I think it's going to be very good for the court. I think it's going to be good for the American body politic, for the people in the states as the authority to protect life in the states is restored. And I think we'll see the American democratic process work. This is a very durable and wonderful country. And I think that we can solve the problems and the issues that have arisen over the last few decades because of this unmoored, unintended right to abortion that was never in the Constitution. I'm looking forward to that process.
Despite everything you've said, we're looking at a deeply divided country over this issue right now. I've maintained that the United States is already engaged in a quiet civil war. Thank goodness, no shooting as of yet. Maybe we do have little skirmishes from here and there. But how much worse is this going to get? And how do you convince the other side in this battle of your point of view, especially when the fourth estate, the fourth branch of government, my business, the media, is misrepresenting the arguments so routinely?
The important thing to do is to call a spade, to understand what abortion really is and what it does to women facing abortion and to the human lives in the womb that are torn apart by it. If we can agree on that, I think we can move forward. The other side has spent a long time obfuscating, denying, using euphemisms like blob of tissue. I think we need to understand the thing in itself and talk about things in real terms as they really are. If we can do that, I think we can agree that abortion ends a human life. That life in the womb is human. It is a member of the species Homo sapiens, and we simply don't believe that some human beings should enjoy more protection than others. We go down a very dark road when we decide that some human lives are worth more than others. And I don't think that anyone wants to do that. I think that if we can agree on those fundamental truths, we can get somewhere as a society.
I think on the subject of euphemisms, which you just mentioned, the biggest euphemism of all that the left uses is the term pro-choice. To do what? Pro-choice to do what?
And they've never answered what the choice is for.
That's right. Exactly.
They've never answered that question. Their euphemisms are designed to hide the truth and not to bring it out into the open.
Right.
So as a movement, what we've tried to do over these years is show the world and show the court what abortion really is and does, what it does to women. And I think this decision today by Justice Alito recognizes that abortion is different. It is the destruction of a human life, recognizes that women never needed abortion to succeed, which is another fallacy the court based Planned Parenthood versus Casey on in 1992. We are moving forward in making our point and getting these truths across, and we'll keep doing that, hopefully, prayerfully, until the other side recognizes that they can no longer defend the destruction of innocent human life.
Lastly, and quickly, Stephen, did you ever think this day would come?
I always knew this day would come because I believe in God's providence, and I believe that the truth will out. I believe that if you talk about all truth, you're talking about God's truth, and that we cannot, as humanity, continue for very long denying the truth. And so I'm very happy to see this day. I'm very thankful.
Oh, we appreciate the absolute firmness of your convictions. Stephen Aden, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
More to come. We'll be right back.
What if there's more to God's plan for health and wholeness than we ever thought to believe? Every year, we spend billions of dollars seeking to be healthy, but only the Bible offers God's actual design for genuine physical wellness. In fact, Proverbs 4:21 tells us, "My son, be attentive to my words, for they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh." That's why this month, for your gift of support in any amount, we are excited to send you Joseph Prince's Healing Scriptures.
Take one verse from the Healing Scriptures and meditate on it, and that grace will transform you.
And for your gift of support of just $40 or more, we'll send you Jordan Rubin's The Maker's Diet.
If you will follow a biblically based health plan, you'll be well. If you look at the Bible in context, the secrets and the principles of life are all there.
Thank you for partnering in TBN's mission to reach around the globe with the hope and grace of Jesus. Please call right now. Operators are standing by. God bless you.
We want to check back in now with our correspondent in Washington, Erick Stakelbeck. Erick, last time we checked in with you, the crowds were building, a lot of noise, but no violence as of yet. What's the latest?
Still peaceful, Doug, but again, a large crowd, and it is not dwindling. It's getting larger. That's number one. The heated rhetoric continues. A lot of F-bombs being dropped, if I may be frank. Secondly, Doug, the police presence has been enhanced. Now, just to set the scene for everyone, we're in between the Senate and the Supreme Court in the media area, and in front of the Senate right now, in front of me, there is a large and growing police presence. That has been noticeable. A little while ago, about 12 officers on bicycles also came by, headed towards the Supreme Court. So as it gets darker, the sun goes down here, you will see that police presence increase. But again, Doug, thousands of pro-abortion protesters here, and they are not clearing out yet.
Okay, I suspect this is the first real test of the Capitol Police Department since January 6th, and I'm sure they don't want to make the same mistakes that they did on that day. So tense situation, but so far so calm. Thank you, Erick. We'll be checking back with you. More to come after this.
Thanks, Doug.
Joining us now is a frontline pro-life fighter and the niece of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Alveda King. Dr. King, good to see you again.
It's good to see you again, too, especially today.
Truly, you've got to be really pleased with this decision.
After so many years and so much prayer and so much effort across America and even around the world, we see a reversal of Roe v. Wade, according to the Dobbs decision. And now the issues that we've been so concerned about for the sanctity of life from the womb to the tomb go back to the states. And I'm in the fight. I'm going to stay in the fight because we're going to be needed now more than ever by those mothers and fathers who have a decision to make about whether or not to birth their children.
Well, really, that's a great point because the fight has just begun, not only in the homes of America and for pregnant women who were seeking an abortion, but on the political front as well. And to that point, I want to read you a tweet from our Attorney General, Merrick Garland. It's quite remarkable. He said, and I quote, "The Supreme Court has eliminated an established right that has been an essential component of women's liberty. The Justice Department strongly disagrees with the court's decision," and this is the key part, "DOJ will use every tool at our disposal to protect reproductive freedom." What do you make of that?
Well, actually, we can see that the government, as it exists today, wants to continue to resist the idea that life is sacred from the womb to the tomb, that we're one blood and one human race, and that we should flourish together as human beings. However, that means that it is a responsibility of the faith community, for example, the various communities around the nation, whether it's ethnicity or economics, we can all come together as a one blood human race and work together to protect the sanctity of life.
Well, he's arguing there that he wants to do everything to protect the right to abortion. How far do you think he'll go to do that?
Abortion is not a civil right. Abortion is not health care. He perhaps will go as far as he can, but he will meet us right at that point where those of us who agree with the decision that all human life is sacred, we are standing. We've never gone away. We're not going away now. We can't rest on our laurels. If we say, oh, it's all over, we can go do something else now. No, this is when we have to really come together and push together for new levels of the sanctity of life from the womb to the tomb. Well, and that opposition that we bring will make a difference.
Well, I'm curious, you know, Merrick Garland has refused to enforce federal law to end these protests at the justices' homes. Clearly, federal statute says that intimidating a judge is against the law, punishable by up to a year in prison. So we know he's done that. Right. How should Christians, how should people of faith, how should people who are opposed to abortion address these protests? I assume they're only going to get more severe.
We should address our concerns at the polls. Here in midterm elections and next year, we're going to have to vote for leaders and representatives who are servant leaders, who fear God, who will uphold the law. And as we begin to vote for those who will stand for the principles that are the American principles, then we will see that these kinds of problems and issues and this resistance just definitely will not stand. But we have a part to do, even though we're Christians, and yes, we are. However, it is Christian to vote responsibly and to elect God-fearing people. That's our next job.
Who comes out ahead in the midterm elections in terms of being inspired by this by this high court decision? Do you think it's the pro-life groups or the pro-choice groups who are vowing to, you know, muster their forces in advance of these midterms?
We will have to see, but we're going to be very busy praying and knocking on doors and asking people to invite their friends to participate in this beautiful opportunity to serve each other for life. Alveda
King, really appreciate your perspective. I know it's a happy day for you, and we appreciate you making some time for us.
Thank you so much.
Joining us now is a national leader and strategist for the pro-life movement, Alison Centofante of Centofante Strategies. Alison, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Yes, full disclosure, I want to tell our audience that when I worked at Fox News in the early days, you were an intern there, and I knew instantly that you were a very promising person with a promising career ahead of you, and boom, here you are 10 years later, and you're doing great. Very much involved in the pro-life movement. This has got to be a great day for you.
It's a great day, and good to hear I made a good cup of coffee at Fox. It's my last day there. You guys upgraded your coffee situation.
I didn't know that.
This is a big day. This is a very big day for the pro-life movement. I was blessed enough to work at Fox and see how everyone covered that, and I've been working in the pro-life movement for a decade now, and I just have to thank so many. There are so many leaders, legislators that have worked on this for decades to get creative about how we educate on the preborn child, how we pitch this to make it make sense to everyone that every child deserves legal protection in our country and that we should be supporting women and moms in a much better way than ending the life of their child. So today is a very, very big day.
Well, it's so interesting to listen to the arguments from the other side. I'm listening to Speaker Pelosi, Governor Kathy Hochul of New York this morning saying that, and the polar opposite of what you just said, that this has nothing to do with protecting women. It's hurting women, they say. Your reaction?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, we just listened to President Biden today just lament how bad this is for women and girls. And I'm standing there looking at the television thinking, but what about all the girls in the womb? What about all of those little women who are tragically killed every single day just because they are dependent on their mom because they're small, because they're not yet able to speak up for themselves. That's not how we make decisions, and that is not fair to them. So think of those women, think of those little children every time you hear someone lament how bad this is for women. And I also need to point out that women deserve better. This has been a lie told to women for so long now, that in order to be successful, we cannot be moms. We have to kill our children at the hands of, terrible men, both the abortionists, usually bad boyfriends, bad husbands, and also, tons of legislators who are telling us that we can't have it all, that we have to end the life of our child. So women, I think, in a post-Roe world are going to see all of the amazing life-affirming options for them. And that is because the pro-life movement has been working for decades to give them so many free life-affirming options, as your guest was talking about with pregnancy resource centers. And just this idea of life, that life has value, Doug. The other side right now is so fixated on death, and we are fixated on life, and that's the big difference.
The game has changed entirely now, just in the past few hours. We've got these midterm elections coming up in November. This has given Democrats and progressives a rallying cry. How powerful will that rallying cry be, and what do you need to do to combat it?
Well, when I saw the decision come out today, I thought, wow, this just proves that our justices were not going to be bullied into changing their minds. They did the right thing amidst a pro-abortion left that was not just threatening attacks, as you know, Doug, but actually executing attacks. A gunman showed up at Kavanaugh's home, ready to take his life. Pregnancy resource centers have been under attack. So I think, if anything, this fortifies the hearts of those who understand what the Constitution did and did not do. They understand prenatal development and the abortion procedure. And I think we're going to see ahead of the next elections this vigorous debate we've needed to have. We've needed to have this discussion about the ethics behind abortion and what we are telling women when we send them to the hands of an abortionist who makes money off of their unplanned pregnancy and their pain and their vulnerability. And so I just hope and pray that today women that are post-abortive share their stories. They join the pro-life movement because we need their stories. We need them to speak out against what took place, what happened to them, that they heal, of course, but that they also join us in this movement of sharing their stories. And also those who are not post-abortive realize the fight has just begun. The battle continues. This was a strategic win in the long-term strategy of the pro-life movement to give rights to all children. And now I want you to get plugged in. I want you to get plugged in politics, or maybe at your pregnancy resource center, or maybe now is the time to finally, pursue adoption, foster care. A group like Lifeline Children's Services, I love. They're based out of Alabama here. They will come alongside any birth mom in an unplanned pregnancy and walk with them, help them connect to either, foster care or adoption. That is the future of a post-Roe world, is supporting women and connecting those who are facing maybe fertility issues or others with women in need.
Looking at you, you're a young person, I look at these protests and I see they're mostly made up of young women, people your age. How do you approach women of that age and convince them? They often tend to be pro-choice. How do you convince them to change sides? What are you doing politically? What are you doing on college campuses? What are you doing among youth groups, et cetera, to get that message?
Yeah, great question. And I noticed that too, watching the coverage this morning, just how young the pro-life movement is. And a big shout out to groups like Students for Life, Concerned Women for America, and others who are down there every day waiting for the decision to come out, and led by women, by a lot of young women being there as activists as well. I'm seeing this movement, Doug, happen for women my age and younger, where they're realizing they've been sold a bill of lies. Whether that was being put on birth control at a very young age and now they're 10 years, 15 years later and they're not able to get pregnant. They didn't know that would be a result. Or maybe they were told that the abortion would be easy and that they would forget everything, and yet they live with post-abortion regret, which is a real thing. We now have young women that have come to age and go, I was lied to, and I want to know the truth. And when they find out the truth, whether that's through an educational video on social media, I think these pro-life organizations are crushing it on social media, sharing what a child is like, even, at 6 weeks in utero with a heartbeat, what the procedure does. Or maybe it's on a college campus, like you said, where you're just having a one-on-one, question and answer to say, well, what about life of the mother? Or what about rape? And just meeting those questions head on. The pro-life movement has the benefit of having a solid, scientific, loving, compassionate answer for all of these questions that don't end in death and destruction of that child.
Alison, last question. You're courageous. I think I've seen video of you confronting protesters outside the Supreme Court and perhaps elsewhere. Is that something that the pro-life movement needs to do? Do we need to go to Justice Kavanaugh's house and confront those protesters on the sidewalk? Or do you not recommend that?
I would not recommend that, given that I'm pretty sure it's against the law what they're doing, trying to influence and harass a justice. I don't know why none of them have been arrested yet. But I would say public advocacy, like you're talking about, Doug, whether that's at the Supreme Court or at your abortion clinic, is going to be huge, because we know in talking to women that are pursuing abortion, sometimes that interception at the abortion clinic can change everything. Just someone saying, hey, I'll adopt your child. Or what do you need to help with? What's going on? They notice a bad boyfriend dropping them off and saying, I'm here for you. I had an abortion. Let's not do this. That can save a life, both the child and the moms. And then also at the Supreme Court, it's going to continue. The fight for life continues as these states war now to create either very pro-abortion policy or pro-life policy. And it's time for us as Americans to realize this is the greatest human rights issue of our time, and you have to be public about it. It's not enough to be private. It's time to save the babies, protect the moms, and do the right thing.
And I lied. One more quickie question here. On the subject of saving lives or providing lives, since you were an intern at Fox News, you're married and you have 2 kids now, is that right?
I do. I have a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Trying to be pro-life myself.
I see that. Well, thank you so much, Alison. Great to talk to you.
Thanks, Doug.
And joining us now is the co-founder of the Silent No More Awareness Campaign, Janet Morana. Janet, it's got to be a happy day for you today.
Oh, it's a joyous day for me. And, I personally knew Norma McCorvey. She was a dear friend of mine. And I spoke to her right before she passed away. And she made me and Father Pavone promise that we would continue the fight to overturn Roe. And so for me today, I looked up to the heavens and I said to Norma, promises kept, Norma. Promises kept. Amen. We succeeded. Roe has been overturned.
Indeed, you did. And it's been a long, hard slog. It's interesting to me because I was thinking earlier today, as a local TV reporter in Washington, D.C. for 2 decades, I guess, and then at Fox News for another 10 decades, I was frequently going to those cold January marches, the March for Life, on the National Mall, and treading through mud and snow and sleet, and I was always amazed at how many thousands upon thousands of people showed up. But there was always a lingering thought in the back of my mind that these people show up every year to do this, and it's not changing. This will never change. Well, I was wrong.
All right. Well, I've gone to that march for 32 consecutive years, never missed a year. And I would march sometimes saying, well, Lord, how many more years are we going to be doing this? And we'll be back in January. But for me, I want to go back always on the 22nd of January, because to me, that's a day that will live in infamy as the American Holocaust of the 62 million children we lost because of this tragic decision. And I'm committed to come back to Washington on the 22nd and hold the memorial service on the steps of the Supreme Court, laying flowers and memorialize the children and also their moms that were hurt by abortion.
But the battleground really changes now. It goes out to the states.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does. And the exciting thing is right now as we speak, 13 states have trigger laws that make abortion illegal in their state. So I'm really excited about that. And there's many other states that have other laws protecting the unborn child that are also going to in effect. And now the will of the people, we have finally taken this sad decision out of the judicial system and putting it back into the legislative system where it belongs, in the states. And we still have to watch our federal courts. We have to watch Congress, too, to protect the unborn. So that's why, I heard President Biden threaten us. Oh, this will be on the ballot. Yes, Mr. President, it will be on the ballot because we pro-lifers are going to show up and put more pro-life people into office than ever before.
And what do you think of the Attorney General's comments that the Justice Department will do everything it can to preserve the right to abortion? I don't know if you've seen that statement, but I'm not quite sure what he means by that. It was a vaguely referenced.
Well, I thought it was kind of sad in a way. I mean, I want to hear the Justice Department that they're going to defend the pregnancy centers that so many have been under attack, destroyed. I was hoping.
By the way, what are the numbers? What are the numbers there? I've read as many as 40 different attacks on pro-life organizations or people. Have you been able to quantify the number of cases of vandalism against pregnancy counseling centers, things of that sort?
Yeah, I've heard, like you, about 40, and I'm sure the number will climb because now they said that tonight and this weekend will be a weekend of revenge, and also this summer, a summer of rage. And so I would have liked Garland to be telling everybody that they cannot do that violence, that they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Instead, he's worrying about transporting women across state lines to still get abortions. Shame on him. Where's the protection of these pregnancy centers, which, by the way, outnumber the abortion centers 4-1. We have about 28 pregnancy help centers all over this country providing real choice for women. And it's kind of ironic that they are attacking the very centers that are giving women an alternate choice to abortion. So what are they saying? Oh, we only want to help women abort their children. We don't believe women are strong enough to give birth to their children. And we say, you are totally wrong, 100%.
Right. Well, I think any normally based person would think that's totally wrong. You're trying to help women and the choice they're making. On that note, quantify, if you could, how many women who have come to you, to your organization, regretting having had an abortion, have come to you expressing themselves and seeking help?
Well, we have the Silent No More Awareness campaign, which are women who've gone through an abortion recovery program. We have thousands and thousands of them who now publicly give testimony. But in addition, we have the Rachel's Vineyard Retreat program, which is for recovering after abortion. And since Dr. Teresa Burke founded that program over 2 decades ago, over 150,000 women have gone through that program alone, and the number keeps growing. We have new retreats opening every single month. And in fact, the Rachel's Vineyard Retreat program is in over 75 countries, and the retreat program has been translated into 26 languages.
And how does the retreat program work?
Well, women come on on a Friday, and they are received in, and it's done it's a scriptural program with living scriptures. They have an opportunity to tell their abortion story. They have a chance to write a letter to their child, get the full feeling of forgiveness and closure that the abortion did not allow them. And the difference in them from Friday night, where they come with their face down and sad, to Sunday, where they feel the burden really lifted, it's miraculous. It really is. And anyone who's watching who wants help after an abortion, just go to abortionforgiveness.com. You put in your zip code, you'll see where the nearest abortion recovery program is right near you.
Well, you've got your work cut out for you now, but in a different lane in many respects. And it's a question that I'm asking most of the guests on tonight's special program. And that is, there are going to be a lot of women who would have had abortions now in cities or in rural areas, wherever it may be, who now give birth to kids, but are woefully inadequate as parents. Nobody wants children raised either in abusive or neglectful households. So it's really important for pro-life people to step up in terms of offering adoption or financing for adoption services. What can you do to get those people to help?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, simple website to go to, pregnancycenters.org. Put in your zip code. You will see where the nearest pregnancy help center is right near you. They will give those women real help. And I mean medical help if they need it, a place to live if they need it, job opportunities, whatever they need. They help them not only give birth to the child, but also get back in the game, get back into education, help them find a job. And also, too, another factor is people are forgetting that in our nation, we have safe haven laws in all 50 states, which means a woman can give birth to that baby and walk out of the hospital and say, I've changed my mind, I can't deal with it. and then the state will make the adoption plan for that child. And the number of couples that are on lists waiting to adopt children is staggering. And so therefore, the pro-life movement and people are out there willing to take these children.
That's a really good statistic, a staggering number of parents who want to adopt children. That's just wonderful news.
Right.
And I hope you guys put it to good use. I know you will. I know you will. Janet Morano, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. God bless.
So, what's next? In many cities, pregnancy centers have been gathering help where undecided pregnant women have been going when they feel caught between an abortion or wanting to save their child's life, even if they need a lot of help doing so. TBN's Belinda Lane visited the Prestonwood Pregnancy Center in Texas.
Across the U.S. today, some 3,000 pregnancy centers have taken away all the reasons, all the excuses women with unplanned pregnancies put forward to not give life to their child. In many cases, with centers offering free health care, adoptions, accommodation, food, clothing, money, counseling, and even car seats.
My daughter would not be alive. She wouldn't. I would have had an abortion.
At the nonprofit Prestonwood Pregnancy Center in Texas, women are choosing life. 20,000 came for help in just the last year.
I think it honestly starts with the phone call. We set up a call center here, so we have people who are trained specifically to answer those crisis calls.
Prestonwood Pregnancy Center, how may I help you?
And so you have a woman who calls, and most often the first question we get is, do you do abortions? And so we don't just automatically say no, because she will hang up. And so we then just get to carry that process throughout. And then it comes down to the sonographer, who then gets to show her her baby.
Can you walk me through what a young mom goes through when she comes into this room?
Absolutely. Part of this is to keep this woman as well informed as we can, but it also makes it really real. Oftentimes I hear from the mother, this sonogram, seeing my baby made it real for me. And the heartbeat works the same way. So I get the joy to introduce these women to their babies for the first time. So if we look at baby here, this is baby's head, this is her eyes, and then right here we can see that heart beating. We're gonna take a listen to this heart beating. And oftentimes it's that moment right there that makes this so real, that this is its own baby with its own set of DNA, its own gender, and its own purpose. There's baby's hand right there.
Oh, I see the hands.
Saying, hi, Mom. We see tears from happiness, we see tears from sadness, but really this is what sinks it in.
I remember I had my eyes closed, the room was dark, and she was like, oh, here we go. And she said, you're 10 weeks in a day. And I remember raising up from the table like, what? Because I'm expecting to see a little bit. My daughter was on that sonogram, and she had her hands, and she looked like she was jumping up and down.
Pastor Jack Graham of Prestonwood Baptist Church opened the first clinic for women with unplanned pregnancies 31 years ago.
I really think it was born in my heart when I was a child. I used to watch a television program with a preacher by the name of Bishop Fulton Sheen. I was a little Baptist boy watching a Catholic bishop on television in the early days of television, and his program began with a hand in the darkness, striking a match, lighting a candle. Then the voiceover came, better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. The whole point is, yes, we want to save babies, but we want to give people hope. The women who walk in the center, their families, their friends, the father of the baby, if we have that opportunity. And of course, we want to give that baby an opportunity to live.
I was shocked. I was terrified, honestly. I was very, very upset.
This woman came to Prestonwood confused.
So I was in a relationship that I found out. Hold on. So when I found out I was pregnant, we had already split up, and of course he did not want me to follow through with having the baby. There's no way that I would have survived without coming here. There's no way.
We want to care for the child, and so we have and most do who do this kind of work, have resource centers where there's clothing and diapers and there's training on how to develop a baby, how to be a mother. You shine a light in the darkness. If there's a pregnancy unplanned or unwanted, or whatever the circumstance may be the kind of Christian that is there for people.
My baby wouldn't be alive. She literally would not be alive if it wasn't for Whitney taking out the time to really allow me to come in and process and speak and be able to sit with my thoughts and my feelings. This center is the reason that Deja is alive, and I would forever give them that credit.
I'm Belinda Lane in Dallas for Centerpoint.
Joining us now is the pastor of the Prestonwood Baptist Church, Pastor Jack Graham. Pastor Graham, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's my privilege. This is a great day.
Let's talk about your reaction to the Supreme Court ruling.
Well, just extreme gratitude, really, because in reality, many years ago, when this first started in 1973, I doubt most of us thought that we could ever see this day, that it would be improbable or maybe even impossible. But after much prayer and hard work and devotion by so many people, I think of all the people in our own pregnancy centers, the volunteers, and those who have given so much time, those in our church and churches like us, and Advocates for Life, and those in the legal profession. And I'm just grateful to God for the opportunity that we've had to now see this victory. And it is a great victory, and we praise God for it.
Let's talk about your pregnancy centers right now. Are you at all concerned about the potential for violence? Have any of them been targeted for violence or threats?
We are prepared, and we've been looking at that for at least a month, and we have very stringent security at our pregnancy centers as well as our church campuses.
Good to hear that, because I suspect a lot of malfeasance may be on tap in the days to come. We'll see. I hope that's not the case, but we have to be prepared for it. It strikes me as well that Christians and pro-life people across this country need to really step up now, because there are going to be in Appalachia, in inner cities, in suburban neighborhoods across America, women giving birth to children for whom they're going to be bad parents, kids who need adoption. The worst thing I think could happen to a child is to have a parent who's negligent or abusive. So it's incumbent upon Christians to really step up now. What kind of help do you need? How would you encourage Christians to get involved in your organization, in your pregnancy centers?
Well, yeah, let's start just beyond us. Let's start with pastors across America. This is an opportunity for every pastor to engage their congregations in advancing life from the womb to the tomb. And we do care about babies born, not just babies unborn. And it's a lie to say anything differently. Pregnancy centers all across America, and certainly church-related pregnancy centers like ours, are very committed to ministry, to discipleship, for caring for families, for being there for the people who need us. So it is a time for us to step up. This is a huge opportunity for us to show the love of Christ, to be salt and light in our communities, and to show the love of Christ, and to give people hope and tangible physical help as well, along with the spiritual opportunity we have. This is I'm praying that this would be just the beginning of a spiritual revolution, a Jesus movement in America, if you will, that we truly could see repentance and revival across America. And that begins, of course, with God's people. It begins with the churches. And we should be on our knees. We should be on our faces right now with thanksgiving to God for what he has done. God has helped us to take down this giant of Roe v. Wade, but the work is just beginning in so many ways, not only legally and politically, but spiritually. And the church of Christ should be ready. And I believe we are able to make a difference in people's lives starting today.
Mm-hmm. Those are wonderful words to hear you speak those words. But the reality, the hard, cold reality is that, what, 40%, depending on what polls you read, 35% up to 50% of Americans disregard those words entirely and in fact just disdain them. How do you reach those people, if you can at all?
Well, that's clear. That's clear in Romans 12:21. We are not overcome by evil, but we overcome evil with good. And so the goodness of God, the grace of God demonstrated through his people. We see, we talk a lot today about a cultural war, but the way our church views it, and I know many pastors and churches view it the same way, who are evangelical, Bible-believing Christians, that people in the world who disagree with us, they're not the enemy. We know this is spiritual warfare. These are the mission field. And so we want to go with the gospel. And the only way to change people's minds and attitudes towards morality is by Christ changing their hearts. And so we preach the gospel, we serve, we work, we minister like we've been doing here at our pregnancy centers for the past 30 years, and many others like us. And I would say that Christians right now are ready and will be responsible to the opportunity that we've been given.
Do you need more parents coming to facilities like yours and saying, I'm willing to adopt a child?
Of course. And that's one thing that many churches are doing. I know we're doing it. We're focusing not only on saving babies, but adoption and foster care. The foster care system in Texas in many ways is broken, according to our state officials. And so we're definitely involved in helping parents to see the need and to give parents the opportunity to receive a child and to be blessed by the child that now lives. And we don't need to forget that while we know there are problems in birthing these children into a world or into a troubled family, these babies shall have the opportunity now to live. Think of, because of Roe v. Wade being struck down, of the hundreds of thousands of babies that will have an opportunity to live.
And one more question on how people can help you out. Do you need more financial donations? Do you need people willing to provide volunteer security, for example?
Well, we're covered with our security, and we do have volunteers who work and provide funds. And so, for me personally, for us personally here at Prestonwood, we're not asking for anything other than your prayers. Thankful for your support. And if you do want to know more about what we're doing, just go to prestonwood.org.
Okay, will do. One last question. How many babies, if you keep a tally of this, have been saved at your facilities?
Over 80,000. And
Wow.
That's documented. That's not guesswork. That is a fact that over 80,000 babies have been born as a result of the ministry of our pregnancy centers.
Well, that last answer just says it all. Thank you so much for that work. Pastor Jack Graham, Prestonwood Baptist Church. Thank you so much, sir. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
It is 8 p.m. Washington, D.C. time right now on one of the longest days of the year, so the sun is still up. Let's check in with Erick Stakelbeck to see whether or not the calm which we've been seeing there, although noisy calm, is still intact. Eric?
Doug, yes, is this the calm before the storm? I think that is the big question right now. Almost 8 o'clock p.m. here on the East Coast, as you said, here in D.C. The demonstration, the protest still going strong in front of the Supreme Court. The police presence is large and getting larger. Again, the big question, Doug, number one, what happens when the sun goes down here in D.C. and really around the country? Another thing to keep in mind, Supreme Court justices' homes. A stone's throw from here in the D.C. area. Think of, obviously, Justice Kavanaugh, the assassination plot against his life recently. So Supreme Court justices' homes and also church services this Sunday. We're keeping a close eye on it. Doug, back to you.
Erick Stakelbeck, thanks for that great work up there. Really appreciate it, Eric. One last time before we check in with Father Frank Pavone. Father Frank, some closing thoughts from you.
Doug, if I could say a word to those who disagree with us and think that today's not such a good move by the Supreme Court, let me just say, first of all, the pro-life movement is not a movement of judgment or condemnation. We don't judge or condemn those who disagree with us or those who have abortions or promote abortions. We're trying to extend hands of mercy and help and hope. Secondly, I want to urge everybody, whether you agree or disagree with the decision today, read the decision. This is not a secret document. It's not written in some foreign language. read the document. It's very educational. It'll calm some of the fears that have been instilled in people from the more extremist supporters of abortion. Third, know that we are with you. The pregnancy centers we've been talking about during this special broadcast. But I want to challenge those who think they have an opinion about abortion to go to another website, lookatabortion.org. We have to make sure we're on the same page. If we're going to debate this issue, and the debates now will increase even more, we've got to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And I always challenge people who say, I have an opinion on abortion. Have you seen one? Lookatabortion.org. So also read the testimonies of those who have had abortions. Let these women speak for themselves. Go to abortiontestimonies.org. And finally, those that are protesting at the Supreme Court right now are going to the wrong place. Go to your state legislators. They're the ones that are going to be making the decisions now. And finally, some people say I have a hard job with abortion full-time. It's really easy. Live baby good, dead baby bad. This is hard to figure out.
Father Frank Pavone, we always appreciate your wisdom and your insights. Thank you so much. And I should also say, it's important for Christians looking at these protests, if they turn violent tonight, to show grace in the face of them, right?
Absolutely.
That's going to do it for this special broadcast of Centerpoint. Up next, Matt and Lori Crouch sit down with Bill and Gloria Gaither for Gaither, A Legacy in Music. I'm Doug McKelway. Have a great night.
If life was a lesson, what did you learn?
Life is a vapor. It's here today and it's gone quickly. Most people either live in the past or in the future. Very few people live in the moment today. I think God